You don't expect your birthday to feel like a funeral. But that's exactly what it felt like that evening. When the roast chicken sat untouched, the cake said, "Congrats, Mason." And no one at the table remembered the woman who made it all happen. My name is Amanda, and I'm 61 years old. I've spent the past 3 decades making sure my family had everything. Warm dinners, clean laundry, safe holidays, even quiet forgiveness when they didn't deserve it. And in return they gave me silence. No candles, no card, no mention of the one person who held it all together while they took turns shining in the spotlight. So when my grandson dropped his fork and demanded I fetch another one, something in me shifted. I didn't move. And that, right there, was the moment I began to take my life back. They thought I was just tired. But the truth was, I had finally woken up. This is not a story about rage. This is a story about rediscovery. About what happens when a woman who's always been last finally puts herself first. And trust me, by the time the truth came out at that family dinner, no one at that table ever looked at me the same again. Because I didn't just walk away. I left the stage with the curtain in flames. Now let me take you back to where it really started. With a dinner that looked like celebration, but tasted like forgetting. When a celebration reminds you that you no longer exist in their eyes. It was supposed to be a special day. Not just for my grandson Mason, who was starting 3rd grade, but for me too. Amanda, a woman turning 61 with a heart still full of quiet hopes. I'd spent the afternoon the same way I always did before family dinners. Roasting chicken, mashing potatoes, baking mac and cheese from scratch. I even added fresh garden salad with the dressing Mason loved. When my son Brian walked in holding a cake box, I felt that little flutter inside. Maybe, just maybe, they remembered this year. He placed the cake in the middle of the table with a grin, tearing off the box lid like it was a gift. He leaned in, and that's when I saw it. "Congratulations, Mason." That's all it said. No candles, no balloons, no "Happy birthday, Mom." I froze, hoping maybe there was a second cake. Maybe this one was just for Mason. But no, that was it. I'd even reminded Brian a few days earlier. Told him gently that my birthday fell on the same day. I said I'd love to feel seen this year. Maybe even celebrated just a little. But somehow, once again, I was invisible. The woman who makes everything happen. Forgotten in plain sight. And when I hesitated, Mason shouted from across the table. "Grandma, I dropped my fork. Go get me another one." I didn't move. For the first time in years. I stayed seated and said softly, "Mason, sweetheart, you can get it yourself." And just like that, the mood shifted. Brian didn't notice. Harold, my husband, grunted something rude under his breath. Melissa looked up with her usual polished smile and said, "Margaret, where do you keep the silverware? I'll grab one for him." They didn't understand. But inside me, something cracked, and something stronger started growing. Because here's the thing about being constantly overlooked. The moment you finally see it for what it is, you can never unsee it again. I spent a lifetime putting everyone first, thinking love meant sacrifice and silence. But love without recognition, that's not love. That's erasure. Sometimes the greatest betrayal doesn't come from what people do, but from what they forget to do. From that moment on, I stopped waiting to be remembered, and I started remembering myself. Because what came next wasn't just a decision, it was a reckoning. It began with a missing birthday cake, but it ended with a suitcase, a secret, and a truth that would shake every corner of that house. Let me tell you what happened next. When giving everything means losing yourself piece by piece. They say being a mother is the most selfless job in the world. And maybe that's true. But no one ever tells you what happens when selflessness becomes your whole identity. Long before anyone ever called me Grandma, I was Amanda. Bright-eyed, hopeful, stubborn in the best way. I wanted to teach, dance, maybe run my own cafe one day. Simple dreams, soft ones. But life had other plans. I married Harold at 28. And within a year I was pregnant with Brian. We didn't have much, but I was happy, at first. I left my job to stay home full-time. Not because I had to, but because Harold didn't believe in wasting money on babysitters. Kids need their mother, he said. That's your job now. So I folded my dreams away, like the linens I washed every Sunday. I raised our son. I stretched every dollar. When Harold started gambling with his poker buddies and most of his paycheck disappeared, I started a food stall at the local farmer's market. Quietly, without telling him. That stall saved us more times than I can count. I never took credit. I just kept going because someone had to. I endured his outbursts, his long disappearances, his mother's sharp tongue and disapproval. Even when I wanted to scream, I told myself, this is marriage. This is motherhood. You don't give up. You stay. Because where I come from, a divorced woman is whispered about. And I didn't want Brian to grow up in a broken home. So I broke myself instead. Quietly. Repeatedly. In the name of love. In the name of duty. In the name of keeping a family together. And that's the part people don't talk about. That sometimes the price of being a good woman is forgetting you're a person at all. I look back now and realize I wasn't living. I was preserving a family, a reputation, even when no one preserved me. And the bitterest truth, all that sacrifice never bought me loyalty, because while I was holding everything together, Harold was off building another family entirely. But we'll get to that soon. For now, I want to leave you with this. Sacrifice without boundaries isn't noble. It's self-erasure. And I had spent far too many years fading from my own life. But something was changing. The birthday, the fork, the silence. They were small moments, but they were mine. And for the first time in decades, I felt them pushing me toward something I'd long forgotten. The right to choose myself. And that moment came. Not with screaming or slamming doors, but with one word I had never dared to say out loud. No. Let me tell you how that sounded the very first time I said it. When one small refusal becomes the start of something big. The fork slipped off the table. It clattered softly against the hardwood floor. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple, ordinary accident. Mason, my 8-year-old grandson, turned to me with a pout and said, "Grandma, get me another one." And for a second I nearly stood up. Because that's what I always did. I was the one who jumped at every need. Refilled drinks. Cut up food. Found missing socks. Picked up dirty dishes without being asked. Not because I was asked kindly, but because it was expected. That's how habits work. You do them long enough, and they become invisible. But that night something held me in place. I looked at Mason. Looked around at the table where no one else even paused. And I said gently, "You can get it yourself, sweetheart." He stared at me like I'd just spoken in another language. So did Melissa. And Harold. Even Brian looked up surprised. It was just a fork. But to them, my refusal felt like disruption. To me, it felt like air filling my lungs for the first time in years. That was the first no. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just a soft, clear boundary from a woman who'd spent decades without any. And what happened next? Melissa stood up instead, that polite smile still painted on. "Where do you keep the extra silverware, Amanda? I'll grab one." But not before Harold muttered under his breath. "Can't even get her grandson a fork anymore." Stung. Of course it did. But I didn't flinch. Because somewhere inside me, something steady and quiet whispered, "You don't owe them your knees anymore." And that's something I wish more women understood. That your worth isn't measured by how quickly you respond to everyone else's wants. You can love your family deeply and still teach your grandson how to reach for what he needs himself. You can be kind and still refuse to be someone's servant. Saying no doesn't make you less loving. Just means you're learning to love yourself too. That single moment, just a fork, just a child's request, wasn't about rebellion. It was about remembering I had a choice. And I made it. That night after dinner, I didn't clean the table. I walked quietly into my bedroom, closed the door behind me, and for the first time in years, I packed a suitcase with no guilt, because what I was leaving behind wasn't just a house. It was a lifetime of one-sided giving. What I was walking toward was still uncertain, but I knew it had to start with the truth. And the truth: my husband had another family, son, second life. He thought I didn't know, but I did, and soon, so would everyone else. Sometimes the quietest women carry the loudest truths. Packing my suitcase wasn't the hardest part. What came after? The gathering of truth, the decision to carry it silently, and the strength not to explode on the spot. That was the storm I walked through. See, I'd known for a while. It started as a whisper. Late-night calls Harold would take outside. Random business trips with no follow-up. Grocery receipts for items we never used. A subtle shift in the way he carried himself. Lighter, almost younger. I told myself I was imagining things. Because the truth is, when you've built your whole life around someone, it's terrifying to admit they might be living another one behind your back. But the truth always finds a way. And mine came through someone I least expected. Well, my oldest friend. The same woman who used to sit with me under our shared stall tent at the market, selling baked goods and hand-labeled jars of jam. She called me one evening, hesitant but firm. "Amanda, I saw something. And you need to see it too." What she sent me wasn't dramatic, just a folder of photos. Harold, my Harold, holding hands with another woman, shopping with her, carrying her bags like a doting husband, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in decades. And next to them, a young girl, maybe 7 or 8. In one of the photos, the girl called out, "Grandpa." The caption underneath simply read, 113B Lincoln Street, apartment 302. I felt my whole chest hollow out. But I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of years pressing down, and whispered, "I knew it." Because deep down I had always known. Women usually do. We just learn to live around our knowing. But not this time. This time I let the fire grow. I began tracing Harold's movements, quietly, looked through bank statements, found small withdrawals near that address, pieced together how he'd sold off land from his hometown, land we were saving for retirement, to pay for their new place. That woman, she knew about me. She knew Harold was married. She simply didn't care. In fact, when I confronted her later, she told me with a straight face that she was fine being in the background, as long as Harold stayed in her life. As if I should have been grateful that she was willing to share him. That moment taught me something. Some betrayals aren't just about infidelity. They're about entitlement. The entitlement to your loyalty, your silence, your place at the end of a very long line. But no more. I didn't expose him right away. Well, waited. Not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because I wanted the moment to be undeniable. I wanted every mask to fall at once. And there's no stage more perfect than a family gathering where everyone's pretending everything is fine. I held on to that truth, not to protect Harold, but to prepare myself. Because the woman I used to be would have crumbled. But the woman I was becoming, she was about to set the stage on fire. And it started with just one question at the dinner table. Sometimes the truth doesn't explode. It unfolds, one stunned silence at a time. I didn't plan to say anything that night. Not really. But there comes a point where the weight of pretending becomes heavier than the fear of letting go. The table was full. Roast chicken half eaten. Laughter drifting up from Mason's end. Melissa giggled at something Brian said. Even Harold, whiskey in hand, seemed unusually at ease. They all looked so comfortable. And maybe that's what finally broke something open inside me. Because for 3 decades, I was the glue that held this family together. And no one at that table even noticed I was cracking. So I stood up slowly. Brian glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Everything okay, Mom?" I nodded, smiled. Then pulled out the envelope I'd hidden beneath the napkin on my lap. "I'd like to share something," I said gently. "I think it's time." Harold immediately stiffened, eyes narrowing. Melissa gave me her usual performative smile. "Oh, what kind of something?" I didn't raise my voice, didn't slam my fist or cry. I simply opened the envelope and held up a photo. Harold, another woman, and a child. I placed it on the table, face up. Brian leaned in first. His brow furrowed. Then the silence swept in. Crushing. "That's your father," I said calmly. "With his other family. The one he's had for over 30 years. Harold jumped to his feet, glass nearly tipping. "What the hell is this? Amanda, are you out of your mind?" But it was too late. Because the room had already shifted. I wasn't just the invisible woman anymore. I was the truth bringer. And the truth had teeth. Melissa looked pale. Brian looked lost. He tried to speak, but no words came out. So I helped him. "Your half-brother lives at 113B Lincoln Street. He's 31, married, has a daughter, which makes her." I turned to Mason. "Your niece." The tension broke like glass under pressure. Brian shot up, yelling. Melissa tried to calm him. Harold barked denial after denial. But I didn't argue. I just stood there. Steady. Like the only person in the room who already knew how the play would end. 'Cause I did. I'd lived in that performance long enough. And now the curtain was falling, loud, fast, and deserved. That night the house erupted. Accusations. Defenses. Pleas. And through it all, I stood in the center. Finally untouched by the chaos I used to clean up after. Here's what I learned that night. Sometimes when you tell the truth, people will try to make you the villain, just to avoid facing the damage they caused. But truth doesn't need permission. It doesn't need applause. Just needs courage. And that night I finally had mine. What came after wasn't peace. Not yet. It was rage, blame, shame. All of it. But it was honest. And sometimes, the road to healing begins right where everything else breaks. Because if they weren't going to let me walk away in peace, I would walk away anyway. But not before giving them one last lesson. About apology. And what it really means. Before we move on, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever kept quiet for the sake of family? Only to realize it was breaking you inside. Or maybe, like Amanda, you've reached a point where silence was no longer peace, but a prison. If any part of Amanda's story speaks to you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you would have done, or what you wish someone had done for you. Because stories like these, they're not just about one woman. They're about all of us. When standing up for yourself gets mistaken for betrayal. The shouting came in waves. Brian's voice cracked as he slammed his hands against the table. "You blew this whole thing up on purpose. Why now? Why like this?" Harold barked something about me being bitter, ungrateful, vindictive. Melissa sniffled dramatically and whispered, "Think about Mason. What kind of example are you setting?" And then came the words that stuck. Not because they were true, but because I'd feared hearing them all my life. "You're being selfish, Mom." Selfish. After everything. After I raised Brian while Harold disappeared for days. After I ran a business in secret just to keep food on the table. After I kept our home standing, while they all took turns ignoring the cracks. They called me selfish for finally saying, "No more." That's when I realized something. People don't call you selfish when you stop giving. They call you selfish when they can no longer take. The lie of the good woman runs deep. She's quiet. She's accommodating. She never complains, never asks for anything, never makes anyone uncomfortable. She puts herself last. Always. But the problem with that version of womanhood is that it rewards you with invisibility. Teaches your children that your value is in how much you give up. And one day, When you decide to stop bleeding for them, they look at you and say, "Why aren't you who you used to be?" But the truth is, I was finally becoming who I should have been all along. That night, when the yelling died down, I stood tall, looked Brian in the eye, and asked him one question. "Do you know what day today is?" He stared at me blankly. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "It's my birthday." He opened his mouth, closed it again. Of course he didn't remember. He hadn't remembered in years. And yet somehow, I was the one being accused of tearing the family apart. Here's the lesson I hope someone else hears. You are allowed to choose yourself, even if it makes people uncomfortable, even if it means stepping out of a role they depended on. Because that role, it wasn't who I truly was. It was who I had to be to keep everyone else comfortable. But no more. That night, I didn't apologize for telling the truth. I didn't beg for understanding. I picked up my suitcase, and as I walked toward the door, Melissa stepped in front of me. With tears, with guilt, with manipulation dressed up as kindness, she said, "What about Mason? Who's going to feed him now?" And that was the moment I stopped being afraid of their disappointment. Because if your love is only valid when you're useful, then it was never love at all. Still, I had one last thing to say. One more moment to reclaim not just my truth, but my dignity, and I did it. With a single apology that none of them saw coming. Let me show you how. When life gives you an ending, sometimes it's a beginning in disguise. A few days after I left, I woke up with a tightness in my chest. Not emotional, the kind that makes your breath shallow, your fingers cold, your body whispering that something isn't quite right. I went to the clinic alone. No one knew. Not Brian, not Melissa, not even Joanne yet. After the scans and tests, the doctor looked at me with a carefully neutral face. But I'd been a wife and a mother long enough to recognize the look people wear when they're trying not to hurt you. "It's cancer," he said. "Stage 4. 6 months, maybe less." I remember nodding quietly. I didn't cry. I just thought, of course it would end like this. All those years I spent trying to survive for other people. And now, when I finally chose me, the clock starts ticking. But something inside me shifted again. Not into despair, but into defiance. If I only had 6 months left, then I wasn't going to waste a single second living like I used to. I moved into a small apartment of my own, tiny, sunlit, and mine. Joanne visited, of course. She didn't ask 1,000 questions. She just sat beside me, held my hand, and said, "Then let's live what's left like it matters." And that's when I signed up for the dance class. Yes, hip-hop. Picture it. A room full of 20-somethings in sneakers and crop tops. And me, Amanda, 61 years old, in soft-soled shoes, a loose cotton t-shirt, and hair pinned back with determination. The first day they smiled politely. By the third they started to whisper. By the fifth they called me Cool Amanda. I laughed. I sweated. I stumbled through every 8-count beat. But I showed up. Because I wasn't dancing to impress anyone. I was dancing to remember what it felt like to move freely. To live inside my own body. And not just function for someone else. People began to notice me. Not as a grandmother, not as a wife, but as a person with rhythm, with spark, with stories told in motion. Some of the kids even asked if I'd ever performed. I smiled and said, "No, darling, but I've survived. That counts for something." Here's the thing they don't tell you. Healing isn't always clinical. Sometimes it's movement. Sometimes it's music. Sometimes it's laughing in a room full of strangers who don't know your past, so they only see your presence. That dance class became my therapy, my rebellion, my freedom. And day by day I started to feel alive. More than I had in decades. 6 weeks in, I went back to the doctor. He looked at my new scans 3 times. Then he looked up, confused. "It's gone," he said. "The cancer. There's no trace of it." I blinked. "Gone." He nodded slowly. They call it spontaneous remission. It's rare, but it happens. I walked out of that clinic and stood in the sun, feeling its warmth not just on my skin, but in my soul. Maybe it was the dance. Maybe it was the joy. Maybe it was finally putting myself first. Whatever it was, I was being given a second chance. And this time, I was going to live it my way. But before I moved forward, there was still one thing left undone. Not revenge, not rage, just clarity, final truth, told in the most public way possible. Let me show you what happened when I asked my husband to apologize on the steps of City Hall, because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply being seen. I never yelled, I never threatened, and I never begged, but I did ask for one thing, one last request before I let go of everything. I called Harold after months of silence. I'll sign the papers, I told him, but only if you meet me in front of City Hall, 3 p.m. this Friday. And you do it properly, publicly. He sputtered at first, of course, said I was crazy, said I was trying to humiliate him, but I stayed calm. It's not humiliation, I said. It's accountability, and I think deep down he knew he owed me that much. So that Friday I showed up, hair brushed back, red lipstick, a soft linen dress that moved in the breeze. I didn't dress for him. I dressed for the woman I used to be, and the one I'd finally become. He was already waiting, gray hair slicked back, jacket too formal for the heat, hands trembling but trying to hide it. There were people around, tourists, locals, a couple teenagers sitting on the steps with iced coffee. I gave him a nod, and then, in front of everyone, Harold did what he never thought he'd do. He apologized. He admitted to the years of lies, the secret family, the manipulation. He said my name clearly, twice, so no one could mistake who he was talking about. And he made one final correction. The rumors about Amanda being bitter and unstable, they're not true. She is strong, she is kind, and everything you've heard was a lie I let others tell. Phones came out. Someone started filming. I didn't flinch. Not because I wanted to be seen by strangers, but because I wanted the truth to live outside of whispered family rooms and closed kitchen doors. I wanted my name to be cleared, where it had once been dragged through the mud. And Harold, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. But maybe, just maybe, he understood at last what it meant to be truly sorry. After he finished, I stepped forward and simply said, "Thank you. That will do." We signed the divorce papers 20 minutes later. No shouting, no scenes, just a quiet final signature that ended 30 years of fiction. Here's what I learned in that moment. Revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes grace is louder, not because it's polite, but because it's deliberate, measured, powerful in its calm. I walked away from City Hall lighter. And Harold, well, he didn't leave with me. He stood there, looking lost in the shadow of a woman he never truly understood, until she stopped waiting to be understood. That afternoon I got a message from Joanne. It was simple. A photo of me, taken from a distance, standing tall on the courthouse steps. The caption read, "This is what rising looks like." And I smiled. Not because it was over, but because what came next was finally mine to shape. Let me tell you what life looks like when the only person you live for is you. You don't forgive to forget. You forgive to set yourself free. The truth is, I didn't walk away from that courthouse just divorced. I walked away whole. But wholeness isn't quiet. It isn't easy. And it sure doesn't come gift-wrapped in closure. Comes slowly. The first visit came from Melissa, unannounced. She sat across from me at the kitchen table of my tiny, sunlit apartment. The same woman who once stood between me and the door, defending the man who betrayed me. This time she looked hollow, not polished, not perfect, just real. She clasped her hands and said softly, "Margaret, sorry. I thought keeping everything looking perfect was the same as keeping it whole. But I see now, I was just keeping it quiet. She went on, tears in her eyes. Brian's been drinking, shutting down. No, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I let her speak, all of it, not to punish her, not to judge, just to listen finally as equals. And when she finished, I handed her a tissue and said, "You're finally the Melissa I always hoped to meet." Because I didn't need her guilt. I didn't need her to rewrite history. I just needed her to be honest. A week later, Brian came to. He stumbled over his words, apologized in half-finished sentences, kept looking down at his hands like a child caught in something he didn't understand. And when he asked, "Do you hate me?" I said gently, "No, Brian. I just stopped waiting for you to see me." That's the thing about forgiveness. It's not a door you open so others can come back in. It's a door you close behind you, so you can finally walk forward without dragging the weight of resentment. I forgave Melissa. I forgave Brian, not because they earned it, but because I deserved peace. And peace doesn't grow in the soil of bitterness. If there's one lesson that's taken me a lifetime to learn, it's this. You don't have to carry what others refuse to own. You can put it down. You can move on. And you can still wish them well. From a distance. That's what freedom really is. Not revenge. Not righteousness. Just release. And with that release came something unexpected. Quiet, sacred kind. The kind you don't have to prove to anyone. I found it in the rhythm of dance. In the laughter of strangers who became community. In the silence of a morning with no expectations. And soon, I found myself dreaming again. Not about the past, but about the places I'd yet to go. Let me show you what it looks like to live the second act of your life. Not in shadows, but in full radiant color. Because the ending doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning you never thought you'd get. These days, I wake up when the sun hits my window. Not when someone else needs something from me. I stretch, smile. I put music on. Yes, even hip-hop. And I dance around my little apartment like I'm 20 again. Because joy doesn't care how old you are. After everything, I didn't just survive. I started over. I signed up for French classes. Learned how to use a camera. Even started planning a trip to Europe. Paris, Spain, maybe a train ride through the Alps. Places I used to dream about while folding laundry and pretending I didn't mind. No, I don't pretend anymore. I also volunteer once a week at a nearby senior center. We don't do anything complicated, just movement. A little rhythm, little breath, little laughter, and the light that comes back into their eyes. It reminds me that no one is ever too old to come back to life. That's the gift I gave myself. Not money. Not revenge. Not a new man or a big house. Just the quiet power of saying, "This life is mine now." And no, it didn't come wrapped in ribbon. It came wrapped in grief, betrayal, and years of being overlooked. But I wouldn't trade it. Because now, finally, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a forgotten woman. I see Amanda. Strong. And full of story. That's the lesson I want to leave with you. Your story isn't over. Not if you're still breathing. Not if your heart still stirs at the thought of more. You get to write the next chapter. And the one after that. And it can be messy, and joyful, and loud, and real. Can be yours. Because the answer to life was never just to endure it. It was always to live it. As yourself. Thank you for listening to Amanda's story. If it touched you, even just a little, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. What would your next chapter look like? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because there are so many more stories waiting to be told. And maybe one of them is yours. Thank you so much for staying with Amanda's story until the very end. If there's one lesson we can all take from her journey, it's this. It's never too late to reclaim your life. Not at 60. Not at 70. Not even after a lifetime of silence. You don't have to burn bridges. But you do have the right to build new ones. Where your name is remembered, your voice is respected, and your heart feels safe. Now I want to hear from you. What did Amanda's story make you feel? Have you ever had a moment where you said, "That's it, I'm choosing me"? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. And if this story moved you in any way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because there are so many more stories to tell, and some of them might just help you rewrite your own.